Man, I'll tell you what, that dang old internet, man, you just go on there and point and click, get in there and talk about www. Call me, you got that.
For some reason or another, you sounded a little taller on radio.
Well, for my money, he's got all the facial characteristics of a criminal.
Now, here's your host, that gravy sopping, crappie flopping, stump jumping, Bible thumping, gun toting, mater growing son of a gun, the backwoods Baptist himself, Pastor Harold Smith.
All right, welcome to the Backwoods Baptist Podcast. Thank you for tuning in today. I appreciate you being here. It is a rainy day in the backwoods of western Arkansas, and I'm looking out my window, and I have a couple of deer bedded down in the woods there. They tend to know what the dates are for season. They know when they're safe and when they're not. And I have ceased the war on whitetails. The freezer door will shut just barely, so we're good for the year. Today, we're going to talk about what's wrong with the SBC. What's wrong with the SBC? And the reason that we're going to do this is not because there's a great big debacle or we're not on the verge of a Southern Baptist convention. But there's just a continuing pattern of just constant turmoil and strife, and it like never dies down, never goes away. And so I think today would be a good day to talk about it while most of these Southern Baptist emotions are not all riled up. So why would you tune in and listen to the thoughts of a backwoods Baptist? What is the backwoods Baptist, and why are we doing another podcast? Well, we're trying to do something that most podcasts don't do. We're trying to apply a heaping helping of country fried common sense to a situation affecting the church today. The purpose of the Backwoods Baptist broadcast is to try to call us back to the days when Baptists invaded the backwoods of America. They went out with pioneers. They planted churches in areas where there weren't any, and they saw great revival. They saw souls saved. They saw churches built, and Baptists became the predominant religion in America. We've gotten away from that. As a matter of fact, we've fallen into kind of a bureaucracy. Most Baptist groups are not what they used to be, and we're hoping to get Baptists back to that. You too might be a backwoods Baptist if you have a shotgun, a rifle, and a four-wheel drive. Most Baptists have those things. Anyways, let's get to what we're talking about today. What's wrong with the SBC? What stirred me to start this podcast and do this is I'm a day late. I try to put these podcasts out on Wednesday, but I spent Sunday through Wednesday in an area where I had very little phone signal. I got a few text messages. If I was on the right rock, facing the right way with a reflection off a buzzard's wing, I might have got a text message. I had no internet, and I enjoyed it. I came back and I said, you know what? I've wasted too much time with my phone out, just scrolling through Twitter, scrolling through Facebook. So when I got home, well, that's the first thing I did. I was like, I got to check, make sure the world hadn't ended while I was out of reach. And just a quick scrolling through Twitter, and Southern Baptists are getting upset and arguing about a couple of different things. And I'm just going, man, this really needs to be addressed. And not when everybody's talking about the problems in the convention, but maybe we'll get a little bit better response. Maybe I'll get a little more listenership if we talk about this when it's not the headline everywhere. And so what I've laid out are three, what I would call problems, fundamental problems, real issues with the Southern Baptist Convention. And I think if you're in the Southern Baptist Convention, hear me out. Okay. I try to do these podcasts in 25 to 30 minutes. So give me another 20 minutes of your time. If you're not in the Southern Baptist Convention, you might be able to help somebody who's wrapped up in that mess. You might be able to talk some sense into them, if you will. So let's just look at the convention from this way. I've got three things I think will help us understand why the convention is in the shape it's in. And number one is a fundamental difference, a fundamental problem. And I no pun intended, I know there are fundamental churches who disagree with the Southern Baptist Convention, but I'm talking about the fundamental basis for the convention. A convention is different than an association, and I won't get into all the polity of it, but basically in a convention, the churches are only in convention during a short time of the year. That's at their annual meeting called a convention. And they have people that they've appointed to run the business and delegate all these things out. And so they just come together and make decisions. What happens in the convention is there's a cooperative program. This is how giving is done. If you don't know, if you're not in the convention, let me give you a quick rundown. If you're in the convention, you already think it's the greatest thing that the world's ever seen. In the cooperative program, a church would designate an amount of money. Most of the time, it's a percentage of the total receipts. So 10%, 5%, 2%, whatever it is, they send a percentage of their income coming through the offering to their state headquarters, which here in Arkansas would be Little Rock. So the Arkansas Baptist State Convention has an office in Little Rock. We would send a percentage if we were still in the convention, we would send a percentage there. They would keep a percentage of all of the receipts that come in, usually around 45 to 50% of the total income would stay in the state, pay for things there, fund all the different offices and mission societies within the state. Then the rest would be sent to the national section, and there it would be divided among 5 seminaries, among disaster relief, Lifeways. Used to be, I don't know if they still get money now, but it would be divided up amongst all the national entities, sent primarily to the North American Mission Board and the International Mission Board. So what you've done, the fundamental problem here is that Southern Baptists have appointed a group of people to handle missions for them. So all they have to do is write a check. The problem with that is that all of this money goes to the center place. Well, anybody that wants control of that money works their way into the centralized location where the money's being handled and spent. And I know budgets are approved by a sent group of messengers from the churches, but those budgets are written by committees appointed by people who run that. And let's just be honest, anywhere that money comes together, it attracts politicians and criminals. And so what we're seeing today in the Southern Baptist Convention is something that was great at one time, but now has become a bloated bureaucracy with billions of dollars being hoarded and spent and socked away and used on pet projects. And we've got an unlimited amount of employees who are functioning as middlemen, making sure this money is being spent right. Southern Baptists have no idea what these entity heads make. Nobody knows how much Al Mohler makes as president of Southern Seminary. Nobody knows how much the head of the IMB, the International Mission Board, makes. Nobody knows how much any employee there makes. We don't know what secretaries get paid. We don't know what their vacation packages are. All of this stuff is kept private from the churches who are responsible for sending the money in. So this is a fundamental problem. While the New Testament recognizes committees, they would send delegations to conduct work. Paul even instructs it in 1 Corinthians, pick men to carry your offering to Jerusalem. And the church at Antioch sent a delegation, we could call it a committee, down to Jerusalem to hash out these false teachers that were Judaizers coming up, making everybody get circumcised. So while the church in the New Testament demonstrate that there is room for committees, there's no room for committees appointed by all of the churches to one committee. So the fundamental problem here is a committee is accountable to a local church. When we have the cooperative program, they say they're accountable. They'll say the headquarters of the Southern Baptist Convention is the local church. But friend, that's simply not the case anymore. It's a fundamental problem. There's millions and millions and millions of dollars being handled, unaccounted for, and Southern Baptists have no idea where it's going and how much is there and what all is owned. So you got the fundamental problem with the Southern Baptist Convention, but you also have a sentimental problem within the Southern Baptist Convention. So since everybody pulled their money together, we have a dollar figure. We can say Southern Baptists gave $4 billion to missions last year. That's more than any other group. Well, you don't know that because most churches did missions through the local church. I don't think any church gave $4 billion, and I'm just making up a number. But if you look collectively at all the churches that didn't funnel it through your little chain, you might be surprised that they outnumber your missions giving. The point I'm making is there's a sentimental attachment to the Southern Baptist Convention that prevents people from seeing it properly. I grew up in the Southern Baptist Convention. When I was in the 7th grade, we left the Missionary Baptist Church. This was the American Baptist Association. And we left there because of the us four and no more syndrome of our church. They were big enough. They didn't want anybody else coming in and messing it up. My mom and dad wanted to be more active in missions and reaching the community. So we left there and joined the First Baptist Church in town, which was a Southern Baptist church. And as soon as we arrived, I began to hear from the pulpit, we are the greatest mission organization in the world. We're the greatest mission. We give more money. We send more missionaries. We do more, bigger, 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 better, better, better. We're the largest. We're the biggest. We're the best. And that's all I was ever told. And so I just repeated that mantra. When I would encounter somebody else, I would say, yeah, but we're bigger. But yeah, but we're better. And so I had this sentimental attachment to the Southern Baptist Convention because all I had heard were the talking points. And if you attend any old Southern Baptist church today, what you'll encounter are a group of old people who are still going around with that mantra. We're the biggest. We're the best. We still do more. And you might bring up some of the modern problems, some of the big scandals that go on within the convention, and they don't know anything about it. They're completely oblivious to what's been going on. Or they'll say, well, that's just one little thing. That's not really a problem. So if you talk about sexual abuse, if you talk about wasted money, if you talk about anything that's really going on, that's all gets a blind eye. Nobody can look at that. Nobody can talk about it because it's still the biggest and the best. Even with all of its baggage, it's still the biggest and the best. And when you get this sentimental attachment to something, you can't leave it. It clouds your judgment. And so with most Southern Baptists, they'll say, well, we've got these 5 seminaries and we train most of the preachers in America today. And we've got that. We can't let those 5 seminaries go. And then they'll say, we've got this and we've got that. And we've got all this work going on and all these good things taking place. And when you get attached to something, it's just like the church member. I'm sure all of you know of churches in your area that are not what they used to be. Maybe at one time they were sold out churches where the gospel was regularly preached, souls were saved, they were thriving, but over time, that church became a shell of what it used to be. And they got maybe a teacher that wasn't as good. They got a preacher that kind of led them astray. They've fallen off the map. They're no longer what they used to be. And then you know somebody that's gone there their whole life and you say, hey, look, your pastor's preaching things that are not biblical. Your church is not doing anything to reach the lost. Y'all are not what you used to be. And they'll say, yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. And you'll say, well, why do you still go there? Well, I've always been here. Well, I'm here too long to leave. And that right there is a sentimental attachment. They don't want to correct the problem. They just can't break away from the problem. They go to that church because their mom and dad go there. They go to that church because Aunt Lucy expects them to be there. And there are a lot of churches within the Southern Baptist Convention who are just as sentimentally attached. They know that there's problems in the convention. They know their money's being wasted. They know there's all sorts of immorality taking place. They know that they're going in a direction doctrinally they don't want to go. They know that Southern Baptist churches are ordaining women to preach and pastor. They know that all of these things are taking place, but sentimentally they're attached. And so they turn a blind eye to it and they just hang on and continue to beat the mantra, but it's still the biggest organization. It's still the best. And here's my challenge to the sentimental. Where does the Bible tell us to be the biggest, the fastest, the first, the largest, the most. As a matter of fact, Jesus's ministry, Jesus's earthly ministry was the exact opposite. Every time his ministry expanded, he preached and it shrank. And this went over and over and over. He feeds 5,000. The next day he says, except you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you can't enter the kingdom. They all leave. It gets down to just the 12. And he says, will you also leave? Now, the point I'm making here is if your sentimental attachment is to the fact that the Cooperative Program was one of the greatest institutions of all time, what happens when the great institution crumbles? Do you not say this is not right? We need to pull away from this? Or do you let sentimental attachment from days gone by dictate your continuance into a doctrinal downgrade? And that's where we're at. So there's three problems that I'm laying out here in this, and we could spend hours talking about this, and I could give a whole bunch of examples. But if you've tuned into this, it's because you have an interest one way and the other at the Southern Baptist Convention, and I'm just trying to categorize these things so that you can see them play out. Get the fundamental difference. Cooperative Program is a centralizing of money that the Bible doesn't authorize. It's a pragmatic approach to missions, and it's got problems a few generations down the line. It always has had. Sentimental problems. You can't leave because it's the biggest, it's the best, it's the most, it's the largest. We just can't break away from this because it's what Grandpa did. And some churches even have in their constitution, if we ever cease to be a Southern Baptist church, our building is sold and given to missions or whatever. Well, why would you say that? You can't guarantee the Southern Baptist Convention stays true to its cause any more than any one church would stay true to its cause. So fundamental, sentimental, psychological. I really think a lot of the reason why things are wrong in the Southern Baptist Convention really goes back to psychological. It's wrong because money's pulling up and people are being attracted there. It's wrong because there's a sentimental attachment to ministries and to churches and to things within the convention that keep people from looking at it with a clear mind. Psychological. Think about this, friend. Many people in the Southern Baptist Convention have a psychological problem that keeps them from leaving. Are you familiar with the phrase battered women syndrome? I've seen this as early as in high school. I saw a girl and a guy that were boyfriend, girlfriend. And the girl was very pretty, very nice, seemed to have a lot going for her. And she had a boyfriend that was just total trash. I mean, he was awful. And he didn't care about her. He talked down to her. He mistreated her. And she couldn't break away from him. They ended up leaving school together. I mean, graduating, getting married, carried this relationship on for years. And he continued to abuse her worse and worse and worse and talk down to her and belittle her and despise her. And she just stayed with him. That's battered women syndrome. Sometimes it's physical abuse. Men will physically abuse their wives, and the wife continues to think it's her fault, and she has to stay, and she has to be there, and she can't break away from this man that's abusing her. If you will step away from the Southern Baptist Convention and look at what's taking place, you're going to see an entire segment of pastors and churches who fit the bill of a battered wife, who have been abused, who have been neglected, who have been accused of all sorts of wicked things that they did not do, and they continue to stay there and take the abuse. I'm not going to name any names here, but I could easily name a half a dozen pastors that are good and godly men who have been slandered, who have been ridiculed, who have had entire Southern Baptist institutions seek to have them removed and fired from their positions. And they do this. And these men, instead of saying, why am I here? Why am I taking this abuse? Why am I fighting with these guys who seek my demise and don't respect me? Why am I here? It's because they have battered women syndrome. You can call it let's not call it BWS. Let's call it BPS, battled. Wait a minute, I'm getting tongue tied here. I'm almost speaking in tongues. battered preacher syndrome, or BCS, battered church syndrome. Let me give you some examples of this. Pastors would go to the microphone. This has been going on for years within the Southern Baptist Convention, bring up a really good point at the convention floor, have large support to be ruled out of order or even ridiculed, even mocked, even disgraced. Preachers that were running for office had all sorts of falsehoods spread about them, all sorts of things said about them that was untrue, lies manufactured, hit pieces written, all of this to discredit them. Now, they're still in the convention. There's churches out there that still give double-digit percentages of their money to an institution that would like to close them, would like to see their pastor fired. Why is that? That leads to this thing where we have to stay and fight. We have to stay and fight. We have to stay here and keep fighting it out. We're soldiers in a battle. Friend, at what time in this battle do you realize the battle's over? Why are you going down with the ship? Why are you continuing to be ridiculed and suffer abuse? Why is your church continuing to be mocked? Why are you funding people who adamantly hate you and oppose you? Why are you doing that? I'll give you one reason. There's a fundamental problem. You're sending money and paying for these people, and they're able to do that because of the system. There's a sentimental attachment that you can't break away from them because you still remember the good old days. And there's this psychological disorder that you think by staying there and fighting, you're going to turn this all around. You haven't turned anything around. But how many battles have you won on the convention floor? None. It's over. But you stay and take abuse. If these were good and godly people, why would they treat their fellow churches who are in cooperation with them? Why would they treat them this way? You're not a soldier in a battle, and you're not fighting the good fight. You're on the right side of things, but you're really just being battered by your abuser, and you can't break away from them. So what's my advice to you? My advice is pretty simple, really. There's help. You don't have to stay there. There's help. There's people that will help you get out of that. They'll help you make decisions. They'll help your church find their own missionaries. There's healing. You don't have to stay and be treated that way. You're not required from Scripture to support the cooperative program. There's health. Your church can actually thrive, and your missions, giving, and participation can increase astronomically outside of writing a check to a state Baptist convention every month. Ask me how I know. Because our church did it. We went from giving 5% to the cooperative program sent to the Arkansas Baptist State Convention in 2007. We broke away from the convention. We no longer participated. We broke fellowship with them. We broke fellowship with our local association. We took missions seriously. We sought out individual missionaries. We didn't just turn around and write a check to another mission board and said, here, you guys handle missions for us. That's the fundamental problem. So instead, we said, we are the mission agency. We're the local church. So we'll select individual missions, individual missionaries, and we did. And you know what happened? Our missions giving went from a mandatory 5% cut. Within 3 years, we were voluntarily above and beyond the general offerings of the church, giving over 20% to missions every year of our general budget. If you looked at the totals, what we were sending to missions and what our church was operating on, we were sending a fifth of the equivalent of our general offering to missions every year. And friend, that number maintained and stayed that way for years. Oh, I know we weren't the biggest. I know we weren't the best. I know other people gave more money. I don't care what other people gave. I'm not going to give an account for a denomination or a convention or even an association. I'm going to give an account for the church I pastored. That's health. That's biblical health. And that's found outside of the convention. It's not the only thing. If you're the battered wife, you tell them, look, he's not the only man in the earth. God will provide for you a husband that will care for you and nurture you and protect you and love you as he loves himself. You can find fellowship outside of a convention that abuses you, mistreats you, talks down to you, and you think that's the only way you can do missions? Look, Lee Creek didn't go become independent, fundamental, whatever Baptist church. We just were unaffiliated. The church I pastored didn't join somebody else's group. At first, we thought we needed to. We thought, well, we left this camp. We need to go join another camp. Where do we go? And over time, we realized we don't need to join some group or subscribe to something or take a pledge or write our name in blood and sacrifice a chicken and carve our name in an oak tree. All we really needed to do was find missionaries that believed like us, doing work we thought was important, and support them. So we did that. And then other missionaries who were not part of the convention, who shared our values, had the same doctrine, our same goals, they would hear about us. We would hear about them. The Lord would put us together. We would bring them in. Our people would meet them. We'd get to know the work. Then we began to send people from our church to these missions, these missionaries, to help them on their field of service. And this natural bond was built. And look, it's not overly sentimental. We've had a few missionaries go rogue over the years. We simply stopped supporting them and took that money elsewhere. That's because that's what the local church was designed to do. So I say all this, and I tell you all this. You don't have to go join somebody else's group. You can just break away from the convention and find missionaries and support them. Find them that believe just like you, share your values. Find them in a field of service that you want to work with. Oh, I know you won't have a penny going to every country like you did when you put $1 in the offering plate, but you'll know the missionaries that you're supporting. You'll be able to give an account for each and every one of them on the day of judgment when you stand before the Lord. But if you do want structure, there are groups outside of the convention. I would encourage you not to get back into a convention, because in a convention, you've consolidated all the spending and the day-to-day operations to one little group of people, and you eventually will lose oversight of that group. It always happens. It happened within the first few years of the Triennial Baptist Convention that was formed in 1814, I believe, or 1812. I don't know. I'm not good with dates in my head. But by 1845, when the Southern Baptist Convention was formed out of the Triennial Baptist Convention, as soon as things began, charges of misappropriation began with it. So don't go back into a convention. Go into association. Associations are ran differently. You can designate funds to go specifically to where you want it to go, and everyone there is paid by designated giving. The association is still accountable to every church. There's a difference between an association and a convention. In our area, there's a great association known as the Baptist Missionary Association. It's the same doctrine that you would have in the Southern Baptist Convention, except it's a better way to do missions. It's a smaller group. You can know everybody. Oh, you won't have 14 million members, but you'll have enough to accomplish whatever needs to be done. So what I'm encouraging you to do is find a healthy system. What's wrong with the convention is not going to be fixed, because it's got a fundamental problem. It's got sentimental attachment that keeps it funded. And it's got psychological problems that make people feel attached that they have to stay in battle. You're never going to find peace when you have two people in the same building that think they're fighting for what's right. The Conservative Baptist Network is not going to overcome the liberal bias of the woke agenda. You're just going to be in a continued fight. And what are you fighting for? Money. Other people's money. Go back and look at your own church's money. Take responsibility for your mission budget. Let that go. Break the sentimental attachment. Let the psychological need to be battered and treated and call yourself a soldier go. Find a healthy way to do missions for your church and watch your church flourish. Last thing I'll say, don't go primitive. the Primitive Baptists said, we don't want to do missions that way. And so they just mission there, and not a healthy way to do. Missions require giving, and they require going. So a call to get out of the Southern Baptist Convention, to get away from what's wrong with it, is really a call just to do missions in a healthy biblical way. So it's helpful. It's not an exhaustive list, but I think it's, what are we looking at here? I think it's 30 minutes of good thoughts on what's wrong. Till next time, we'll see you guys right back here on the Backwoods Baptist Podcast.